I'm gonna get us started. We'll probably be a little more casual today because this is a nice intimate group. Um, but I'm gonna just kick us off and say thank you everyone for joining this informational webinar about the statewide digital collections portal, Michigan Memories. We will be recording this meeting, and we're hoping that there'll be a vigorous discussion after Rick's initial presentation. So there'll be a lot of time for discussion, and you're invited to hold any questions until then and come off mute and ask your questions in real time. If you don't want to be on the recording, you're still welcome to weigh in if you use the Zoom chat, and you won't be included. So with all of that out of the way, I just want to welcome Richard C. Adler. Rick is the coordinator of the Michigan Service Hub, which is part of the hub network of DPLA. He's traveled around the state to meet with staff at cultural institutions and work with them to share their online collections with DPLA and with the newly rebuilt Michigan Memories. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick. Thanks.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you everyone for joining. And I want to thank Dominic and the rest of DPLA for giving me a chance to talk to you today about the new Michigan Memories. This site took a while to come together, but it's finally here, and I'm pretty pleased with how it all turned out. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about how the site, this new version of the site is different from the first one, why that is, and what we hope to accomplish with this new site now that it's here. Now, normally at this point, this is where I usually launch into my what's the DPLA part of the conversation, but I certainly don't need to do that here. So instead, let me give you some background about the Michigan Service Hub and about Michigan itself to kind of set the stage. Oops, we have to get into that. Um, so the Michigan Service Hub got started back in the summer of 2015 when 6 institutions in Michigan signed a memorandum of understanding. The first of the institutions was our state library, the Library of Michigan, and then 4 of our universities, the University of Michigan, which is in Ann Arbor, Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan State University in Lansing, and Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. And last but certainly not least, the 6th institution, the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services, or MCLS. Now, this is a nonprofit organization that supports resource sharing and collaboration among libraries in, strangely enough, Michigan and Indiana. So the Library of Michigan acts as the project leader, and MCLS is the fiscal agent. Now, as the Service Hub coordinator, I'm the one full-time employee of the hub, and I'm based at the University of Michigan. But I have several colleagues around the state who provide metadata skills and technical support as part of their other responsibilities. So we do spread the work around. Now, one way you can see this is if you take a look at how we handle our metadata. So in this slide here, you can see how our hub has taken sort of a decentralized approach. Each of those 4 universities acts as what we call a sub-hub. So when a cultural institution starts to work with us, I put their liaison in touch with the metadata specialist at the university that's geographically closest to them. That specialist then works with that institution on mapping their metadata over to the MODS profile that we use for the hub. Then when it's time for our next DPLA harvest, I import all the metadata that are new or revised since the last harvest from the other subhubs. So we have 2 Combine instances at Wayne State and Western, and we still have 1 Repox instance at Michigan State. So I bring all those metadata into Combine at the University of Michigan, and that's where the DPLA can harvest from us, and it's also where we can update the new Michigan memories. So each of the universities shares some of the metadata work, but by consolidating it into 1 Combine instance, we streamline updates for both the DPLA and Michigan memories. Now, incidentally, we don't think you have to use Combine the way we do, but if you're looking into this documentation, it might be helpful to know this is how we're doing it. Anyway, this is about Michigan memories today. So like the DPLA, we only deal with metadata, and that's been true for both the old and new versions of the site. And we're going to be in very familiar territory for all of you. Actually, I jumped the gun. Let me get back to this. We put together a proposal for the first Michigan Memories in 2017, and development began in 2018. And we contracted out to a third-party firm, and the whole project was funded by an LSTA grant that was awarded to Wayne State University. Now, the main challenge we faced at that time was we weren't entirely sure what a Michigan State portal should be. Providing access to collection metadata in a way that would be a Michigan-centric complement to the DPLA, yeah, we got that part. That was easy enough. But what else could we do? We weren't really sure, and so we had to make some calculated guesses. Now, our first thought was to make some primary source sets in the style of the DPLA back then, and that eventually resulted in us creating 3 lesson plans. We also created a page that would try to highlight each of the institutions that were sharing collections through the site. Now, these were both good ideas, but they didn't quite work out the way that we hoped. For one thing, we really overthought the lesson plans. When we later put together focus group meetings with several Michigan teachers, they emphasized their need for simple and very flexible resources, teaching tools that they could adapt to a variety of different topics and classroom exercises. The lesson plans we gave them were way too top heavy, and they assumed more time than most teachers would have to cover a particular topic. But the real issue we ran into with the site, after a couple of years especially, was the technical complexity of the website. The combination that we had of blacklight, spotlight exhibits, Apache Solar, they never quite worked together in the way that we hoped they would. There were other components of the hood under the hood as well, and all of these parts were developed along different timelines. And before long, the site was in need of a major update, and finding a developer with all the necessary skill sets to effect that update was not easy. Eventually, we went back to the original development firm and began working with them again, but then the lead developer took a job with another firm right in the middle of the project, and his replacement for the rest of the duration struggled with the learning curve necessary in order to learn all the different components of the site. So by late 2021, I was feeling pretty frustrated. We had done enough harvest by that point, and I had talked to enough people around Michigan to start getting a good idea of what Michigan Memories could be, but trying to get there with the site we had was looking increasingly unlikely. So that's when Shannon White of the Library of Michigan stepped in. Shannon had always had a way of finding money in the state library's budget to make things happen, and she did that one more time for us right before she retired, and provided a fund that would allow us to rebuild Michigan Memories from the ground up. So in early 2022, that's what we started to do. So now I had a second chance. The question was, what kind of a website should the new Michigan Memories be based on? And my first choice was Drupal. Now, there's no question that Drupal can be a complex and daunting beast. But 15 years ago, I co-founded a small LLC, lasted for about 2 years, that was devoted to developing complex Drupal websites. So I was comfortable with the Drupal environment. And since I would be the one developing the bulk of the content for the site once it was up and running, it made sense to start with something I already knew. Plus, Drupal is not an unusual choice in a government or an academic environment, and that was the space where the Service Hub basically mostly lived. Drupal would also allow us to add all the features I've been hoping to have in Michigan Memories, but do it within the same environment, rather than having to cobble together a variety of different applications from many different sources, all in their own development timelines, which was the problem that plagued the first version of the site. In the end, we needed Apache Solar again, but Solar and Drupal is not an unusual match. The point being was that I wanted to make sustainability a top priority. Limiting the number of completely separate applications was the first step. The second and more important step, now that I had settled on Drupal, was to limit the demand for customized code as much as possible. The more we use the Drupal modules off the shelf, the easier it would be to keep up to date. So back when I was co-running that LLC all those many years ago, we had had a couple of clients, who shall go nameless, who had insisted on micromanaging every detail of their site. Every page had to look just so, every feature had to work one particular and often idiosyncratic way. Now, we gave them what they wanted, of course, but the sites we delivered were run through with customized code. And sure enough, in a few short years, those sites became next to impossible to update without significant investments in time and money. So here's my important point on this. So long as the user experience remains intact, I'll say it again, so long as the user experience remains intact, it's always better to compromise your perfect vision if doing so will make the site more sustainable over time. That was a hard-won lesson. So, having already been through this with the first version of Michigan Memories, I absolutely wanted to avoid the same problem happening again. So, I put together a pitch for the development term, for development firm that was the exact kind that I had always wanted to hear when I had been sitting on the other side of the table. And that worked. It worked a little bit too well. Because the firm was enthusiastic about my wish to avoid customization whenever possible, and things got off to a quick start. But we were still talking about building a website that would be managing over 800,000 records and also managing metadata from many different institutions. So our 6-month project ended up taking 3 years. But if you've ever been involved in a software project or a website development, you know how that sort of thing goes. And we still avoided customizing modules whenever we could. So I was still able to get at least part of the way to my goal. So we had a new website, which we launched earlier this year on February 28th. And it had an entirely new look, but search remained front and center as part of the experience. That's one thing that hadn't changed. Now, to be perfectly honest, at this point, the search response is a little bit slow. We're still working on that. We have some ideas. Like any new website, we still have a little bit more tweaking to do. But one big improvement over the old site is how we were able to keep our records up to date. It was becoming increasingly difficult to update the old Michigan memories as we completed each DPLA harvest. Again, all those different component parts were not working well together. But now with the new site, we have an automated cron job that will run that will update all new and revised metadata every 30 days. And I also have a secure page on the site that I can go to that will allow me to do a manual update of any collection whenever that's necessary. So if we have an institution that says we really would like to have our collections in Michigan Memories right away, I can do that pretty much immediately. So let me walk through the website starting obviously with search. Now, again, this, as I said before, this is going to be familiar territory. When you do a search for something, in this case, ice cream, you're going to get a page of results. And obviously, all the information here is coming from the metadata of the institutions that shared with us. Um, the one surprise for us were the filters there on the left. Those did turn out to be a challenge. And this is the one area where we did end up having to customize quite a bit. And I would have to say that the filters are still a bit of a work in progress. Um, we expect we'll get good feedback on them as users work with them, but there's always something when you finish a website that you want to revisit, and the filters would be the thing that I'd want to revisit if we ever get back to another round of development on this. Anyway, if you click on the titles of any of those search results, you get a pop-up display. This again is another kind of experiment. This is different from how we used to do it before. We're going to be curious to see how people think about this way of displaying all the metadata for a record. Hopefully they like it. We added buttons there at the bottom left and bottom right to allow people to cycle through all the search results one after another. We'll see what people think. And of course, we've got that button under the thumbnail image of View Full Item. You click on that, you know what happens. You go to the website of the institution that shared it. So we're in very familiar territory here. Everything works the way that you would expect to with a DPLA associated site. But we had done everything that the old site had done. We added a few new ideas. We would be much more effective at keeping everything up to date, but I was hoping to do more. So what else could we add that the old site didn't have? And so that's going to bring me to the top right of the screen there, the landing page, that line of institutions, topics, education, exhibits, and blog. So I want to walk through those because those are the new features, new or updated features that make this version of the site very different from the old one. So first up, institutions. Um, This was one idea that we had carried over from the old site, but this version finally works the way that we wanted the old one to do. So what we have here is an alphabetical list with each institution that is sharing records with us and the number of their records that's on the site. Now, clicking on one of these boxes will take you to a filtered view of just those institutions' records. Now, this is a great way to search the site. It's also good marketing because it's another way for us to kind of showcase the different institutions that are already sharing with us. Next, we have a topics page. So this is another idea that we took from the old site. Again, it now works in a way that it never really did in the old version. This section relies on the subject metadata we receive for each one of the records, and we've organized it by subject or topic from the most commonly used to the least. And again, we're displaying how many records we have for each of those particular subjects. Now, the idea here, as with the institution section, is to try organizing our 800,000 plus records in different ways in the hope of sparking new ideas in our users, and maybe even surprising them by what kinds of topics that they can find on the site. We have an awful lot about mollusks. You wouldn't necessarily expect that. Um, if we just presented the users with 800,000 records in a blank search box, they'd try a couple terms that came to mind and then probably stop and never go any deeper unless they come up with a project to work on. Instead, we want to upfront give them a variety of different ways into those 800,000 records to try to encourage them to experiment and maybe find things that they never expected to find. Next, education. Now, I had mentioned before that we had those 3 lesson plans, and our thinking evolved some more as we were preparing this new site. its intended audience has always been teachers more than students. A student-oriented Michigan Memories would look very different from the way this one does. But learning how to provide resources for that teachers could actually use, that took us a little bit of time. So we didn't want to replicate those first three lesson plans. We wanted to give them primary sources that they could really integrate into their curricula in different kinds of ways. So while we were preparing this new site, I have a service content team that helps me put together for it. And while we were getting ready for the new site to launch, we started working on several theme pages that would take a simpler approach. So we spent an entire year cycling through the entire year, mostly focusing on commemorative months. So Black History Month in February, Women's History Month, all the other different commemorative months, and then also a few other topics along the way, like holiday season, summertime, that sort of thing. So rather than try to do something too top heavy, we basically just tried to put together a series of photographs or other records about that particular topic, and then provide a direct link to each of the institutions that host that particular record right there on the page. And then we just provided research questions. So the idea is that we hope that this will help spark ideas for the teacher of, oh, I could use this particular image for this particular lesson plan, even one that in this case might not necessarily even be about lighthouses, but maybe this would actually fit. Now, Michigan has, well, not so recent now, social studies standards that are used to inform our curricula. And they have Michigan history is visited by those social studies standards in different ways over the course of particularly second grade to fifth grade, then again eighth grade, then again in high school. So how some of these questions would read will be different depending on what grade level a teacher may be at and what objective they're trying to approach. And obviously, we have many more pages in mind for doing this sort of thing, and we've invited teachers to give us more suggestions too, and we're going to continue to do that. So that brings me to exhibits. Now, the education section was directed as teachers, but the exhibits are intended for the general public. And exhibits were what I was most hoping for with the new site. And my experience in putting together this first exhibit about the lumber industry in Michigan during the late 19th century really fulfilled my hopes. The exhibit module required a few refinements, and not so much customization. It was more about changing some of the initial configurations. But once all those were done, I pretty much had exactly the content creation tool I've been looking for and waiting for years. So go Drupal. Um, Now, back in February, I had big ambitions. I was going to try to get an exhibit up once a month. And if you're laughing at me now, yeah, you're right. Not even coming close to that. But I'm moving ahead with these as quickly as I possibly can. Currently, I'm working on one about Michigan railroads. Um, I'm also planning one on maritime geography. That one will actually probably have a broader Great Lakes focus. Furniture manufacturing, very big in Grand Rapids and some other parts of the state. Obviously, the automobile industry. It's Michigan after all. And I hope this summer, I hope to do one about ice cream, which would be sort of an homage to an exhibit on ice cream parlors that Recollection Wisconsin has. So a hat tip to them. Now, my thinking evolved with exhibits as I was putting this together too. I knew I wanted to do them, but it was only when I started putting this together that I realized that I needed to end each exhibit with two very important sections. One would be a sources page that would give a full citation for every record that we used. And if an institution had a preferred format that they displayed on their website, I'd want to conform to that. The other thing, though, was a references section. Now, the references section would be basically a would you like to learn more kind of a thing. And at first, I assumed I would be putting links to other online collections in there. But as I started putting this exhibit together, I realized that the quality of it became dramatically better when I started incorporating print sources as well as online sources into the overall narrative of the page. Now, it didn't take me long after that to realize that this part of the exhibit should not only include online sources and then notable sources in print, but it should also mention the archives and local history rooms and other institutions in Michigan that have materials that help to relate to the site. In other words, the exhibit section would allow me to showcase the institutions themselves as well as their collections. And in doing that, we can encourage people to reach out and visit those institutions. So Michigan Memories in the DPLA style start out by adding traffic to an institution's website, but this new version might also allow us to add foot traffic to their reading rooms. So it's an aspiration at this point, but I think there's a good chance of that working. The other piece is we finally have a blog. Yes, a blog in 2025. It's not quite as out of date as it was. They're kind of coming back. Um, but this also fits into the line of thought with the exhibits because a blog, in a sense, finally gives Michigan Memories a voice for talking about Michigan's cultural institutions, and it allows us to raise our visibility among the public. So, for example, we're working on a post about what to expect when visiting an archive for the first time. We want to get that idea in people's minds. And since you can subscribe to the blog with any RSS reader, the blog also becomes another way to remind people when we have new content. So again, always think about marketing. So again, thinking is evolving here, moving towards the idea of a new version of Michigan Memories that could be, in a way, kind of interactive, certainly more than the old site could. And that takes me back to the landing page here, and at the far upper right there, where we have contact, because we have a new contact form. The first version of Michigan Memories didn't really have a good way for people to get in touch. Now, to be fair, back then it was all I could do to keep up with the new collections coming in just through my conference presentations and through word of mouth. That kept me pretty busy. But now in 2025, the Service Hub has been around long enough to give me a chance to reach out a bit more broadly. So now people have a chance to reach out to the Service Hub too. It can go both ways. And I've actually been quite surprised since February 28th how many messages I've already started receiving through the forum. Productive messages, even. We've already had somebody identifying their grandparent in one of our photographs. But what's especially exciting is I've had multiple contacts from institutions that are getting in touch for the very first time and saying they're interested in the Service Hub, interested in DPLA, and they're interested in sharing their collection of Michigan memories. So that's already happened. And my hope is that we're going to get a lot more contacts like that. And I'm going to be able to broaden the reach of the Michigan Service Hub in a way that we've never been able to do with the old site. So this new site has really fulfilled my hopes, but it's also brought some interesting surprises. And it's going to be an interesting challenge now to figure out how some of these unexpected elements are going to offer new opportunities. So, like I say, I want to thank Dominic and everyone again for the chance to talk to you about the site. I'd really love to have any questions or feedback or thoughts that you have about what we have here. I might even get adventurous enough to bring up the site live as we talk about it and see how that goes. So, thank you. Let's see if I can do that.
Great. Thanks so much. I have a couple of questions, but I'll let someone else go first. If anyone has any questions already, I'll give it a second for people to weigh in. I will ask something just to get us started, something that I was wondering, which is if you can say more about the kind of like the curatorial workflow for the exhibits, because I know you said it's built in a Drupal module, but are these all like intellectually authored by Rick Adler? Or are you just the
So
web
far,
content
I hope,
manager, or is there like a
yeah.
contribution pipeline? It sounds like a
Um,
lot of work.
Yeah, I hope it won't all be me. I'm happy to do it. I mean, this really, takes me back to my history background, so I love to do it. But obviously, having one person building all the exhibits is going to, really squeeze the pipeline. I do have a content team, 3 person. And I've got some other people in the state who are interested in coming on board. I think it's, you know, the people we have already on the team are a variety of different voices, education, government documents, the archives, but obviously having a greater diversity of voices is actually going to only help, and it will also help us to bring people with more expertise in different areas to do exhibits about different kinds of things. So my hope is to open it up. It's also finally gives me an opportunity to potentially have interns or students come in and start to work on projects as well. So still very early days for all of that, but I definitely think that that's where we're going to be going. But yeah, the lumber industry was basically my work. The everything that was on the education pages, that was a collaboration of the four members of the content team, putting those together with a lot of feedback from our teaching focus groups, giving us thoughts about, okay, make this simpler, make this more flexible, more, and we finally got to something that they were pretty happy with.
Yeah, I mean, kind of similar question from Teresa, but about the teacher-oriented topic pages. Who wrote the research questions on those?
That was us coming together. We were doing a very quick research online of what could be found. I think one thing that we really need to do is at the time we were putting those together, we weren't quite clear on would this be something that teachers could direct students to look at, or would this be simply a resource tool that teachers would be looking at? So we're a little hesitant about putting the answers up to the questions, but the answers are fairly easy to find. So I think we may find some way. We're sort of thinking about different ways of doing this, of making them available for teachers, uh, but not too easy. I don't know. I think in the end, this is really going to be more of a teacher-oriented site, and so I think we'll just put the answers out there and make it a resource for teachers. I think if they wanted to present something to their students, I doubt they would direct them to the website, given the approach it takes, which is not really, it's not really meant for a grade school audience in particular. My guess is the teachers would create their own materials. So I think we can probably get the answers up there, and that might be a little bit more useful immediately for teachers to use.
And we did also get a comment, excited that people are reaching out with interest for newly contributing to the hub.
I did not expect that, honestly. I thought it might happen eventually, but it was a real surprise. And it's been about 7 or 8 so far, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw out another question. This is maybe a loaded question, but I was wondering if you had anything you could say about how you're measuring success. What kinds of outcomes are you tracking, or like is future funding dependent on page views of the site or anything like that?
Not as yet. We've got Google Analytics 4 on this, and so we've been tracking it from day one. Um, we're still early enough in the site. We had a nice bump in the beginning because we put word out through various mailing lists in Michigan, including Michigan libraries in general. So I had a nice big bump, and obviously that settled down again. Um, Again, it's kind of my bottleneck. The more exhibits and new content I can get up, the more blog posts I can put out there, I think the better things will get. But yeah, we're kind of in that trough of initial excitement. Now we got to build, and then we can build from there. The old site, which was much more constrained than this one, still had a steady progression of growth over time. And so I think with this site, with what it can do, I think we're going to see the same thing. The problem was we had a fairly year-long period where the old site was up, but it had really sort of been locked in place. And so I think the usability rate kind of went down a bit. So I think we have to kind of rebuild that audience, but I think we'll get there. Certainly the reactions I've had to the site so far have been positive. So as far as benchmarks go, um, I've had some queries about it, but everybody sort of understands, look, we're still very early in this period. We have to add more content and really build it up, really continue to get the word out. I think at some point we're going to have some benchmarks to say, look, we need to hit a certain level of usability or usage rate, but that hasn't been specified yet. Obviously, in the current environment, that will probably happen sooner rather than later.
Thanks for that. Does anyone else have any other feedback or questions?
One question I had, if any of you have opinions about it, is what about like the range of these new features that we're adding? I mean, do they make sense to you? Is there something here that's kind of surprising? Um, is there anything that, given what the site does have, you're surprised that we don't have? Um, Obviously we put this in front of a lot of people, but it's always good to get more eyes on it. And, ideas for the future and what future development we could do is always welcome. Or it can come later.
Imagining everyone just clicking around on the site
That's
now
probably
on
true.
their own.
I hadn't thought about that.
Okay, one comment that meets with what you would expect from a state hub site. Here's another question. Did you benchmark against other hubs to pick elements?
In terms of like content, yeah, I mean, I definitely spent a fair amount of time looking at what the other service hubs were doing with their websites. Like I say, it was Indiana, Minnesota, and Wisconsin were particularly large, but I was looking at Texas and other ones as well. So there are a lot of great, obviously, hubs out there to look at, and so that definitely gave me some inspiration. But that was also just part of the discussions we had here in Michigan of what seemed to make sense for us. And we were always starting from the premise of, well, what do we actually have in our collections? What would that allow us to do? So that made for a slightly different situation compared to maybe what some of the other options are available to other service hubs. But yeah, and I continue to do that. I continue to look at new sites that are getting rolled out to see if we can get more ideas.
One thing that um, Indiana Memory has, which I think is a new feature because they've also done a redesign that I
Yeah.
like, is they have a state map as one of the ways that you can browse. And it's like you can, all of the counties are clickable, and then they have every institution from that area, and you can browse that way.
I really like that a lot. Yeah. Um, we had experimented with geolocation in the first site, and it was really clunky. We just didn't get good enough metadata from the institutions that were sharing with us. And we experimented with trying to get around that. It didn't quite work the way we did. I think that's another thing that we probably go back and take a look at again, because yeah, the site doesn't have a map of Michigan, and that, you know, we're always pointing at our hands trying to show where things are in the state. It's just a natural thing to do. So that would definitely be something I'd like to add in the future.
Yeah. I don't think they're actually using any item metadata, but it's just
Yeah.
like the address, street address of the institution.
Yeah, which is great.
And here's a new comment. Um, from both a user opinion and a hub coordinator workflow opinion, I like the one-stop shop ability that the primary source set exhibits are within Michigan Memory site instead of having to link to another site within or with another vendor or host.
Varying yes, yeah, we can vary the results by page. That actually, right now we have a default of 24. We're going to reduce that to 10. We think that might make search response a little bit faster, but we did want to give people the option of being able to adjust the results as they wanted to. The issues with the filters, someone's asking about the issues we ran into with the filters. Um, I had hoped to be able to use filter modules right off the shelf, and they didn't quite work in a way that we hoped. Some of what was done is a little opaque to me because it was definitely digging into the code on the other side, and I've had some experience with PHP, but not enough to make me anything other than dangerous. So I wouldn't be able to describe what was going on in detail. But uh, it really became a case of having to sort of design each filter separately, and each one sort of became unique, which is not necessarily the best way of doing it. It was the best way we could approach it, given our situation to start with. Um, and so I think if we can come back and do further development on the site, it would be good to do sort of a refresh look at what filtering modules are out there in the Drupal universe, and maybe there might be better ones that we could use, or maybe we could kind of take a fresh approach to some of these filters and put a little bit more time and effort into them. But as it is now, they're somewhat limited by the metadata we're given, and they're also sort of limited in what the particular modules that we use can actually do. So I think they're useful. We tried to only put out the ones we felt were helpful in their way, but it's the one part of the site that I think could probably use some further work. Oh, and you had, yeah, the point about everything being on the same site. That was another big goal for what I had with the new website, because previously we actually did have about 3 or 4 different locations online where we had different bits of content. Everything is now consolidated into Michigan Memories, including a login only section just for the advisory group. That includes some, internal documentation, things like that. They can log into the site and get access to those particular pages, and that allows me to keep everything in the same place. It just makes things a lot easier for everyone to know that just go to, michiganmemories.org and you're going to find everything that pertains to the Service Hub. In addition to that, I will probably also be adding public-facing documentation in addition, share our mods profile, maybe share a short version of our onboarding document so that people who are just kind of curious, those people who are contacting me through the contact form, they could get a little bit more information about what will be involved in working with us and also learn about the DPLA.
Thank you. And there is one more question about uh, I'm not seeing a link out to social media. Any reasons why?
We do have a Facebook page. We haven't added that just yet. It's it's something we have to do. Um, that's pretty easy to do within the dashboard that Drupal gives me, so I'm going to add that to the page at some point. Um, but yeah, it's something we've been trying to integrate into. We've been trying to rethink how we do our Facebook page as well. So we were kind of focused just on the content of the site at this point, as opposed to, trying to direct people off it right away. But Facebook in particular is still important, so that will be getting added pretty quickly. Thank you for the reminder.
Okay, that's the end of the questions we had so far. So if anyone has any further feedback, please feel free to get it in.
Mhm.
And we can also, I forget if your last slide had your contact information or if there's anything else you want to put up about how people can reach you.
Let me go back to that. Oops, I did that too quickly. Yeah, I'm happy to put that back up. You're seeing it now?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, please feel free. Happy to talk to any of you about it. If I can give you feedback and thoughts about, our experiences in doing it and talk about your websites, I'm happy to do that too. Um, but yeah, I think the main thing I learned was patience. And keep
Yeah,
at
I
it.
think
The day will come.
on that note, we'll wrap it up. We got one more congratulations in the chat. So yeah, and thank you so much for joining us and for sharing. We'll be posting the video to our YouTube account soon. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.